In the Middle East, a breakthrough which could see better relations between Iran and the West, while Egypt saw fresh turmoil that ended with its president imprisoned. But we begin in Syria, where one of the most horrific incidents of its brutal civil war shocked the world into action.
Late August, and another day in a brutal civil war which has already claimed more than 100,000 lives in Syria. But this day would shake the world out of its inertia because of the horror that unfolded. Reports quickly emerge of a sarin gas attack on a rebel-held area near Damascus. It wasn't the first time rumors of chemical weapon use had surfaced, but the evidence this time was overwhelming. Pictures of dead and dying men, women, and children in the dozens went viral and were shown all over the world. Soon, the war of words began. The rebels blamed the regime of President Bashar al-Assad, saying his forces launched a sarin gas attack out of desperation to stop a rebel advance on the Syrian capital. But Assad claimed it was the rebels who deliberately used chemical weapons to frame his government and drag the United States into the war. European powers such as France and Britain were convinced it was Assad and began lobbying Washington that a strong response was needed. The Obama administration was cautious at first, mindful of the American people's reluctance to get involved in yet another war. But in the days and weeks that followed, Washington began to harden its tone, sending warships to the region and making clear it was thinking of action.
The United States presented a powerful case that the Syrian government was responsible for this attack on its own people.
Syria's major ally, Russia, looked on with dismay as the West beat the drum of war, warning a military strike would only make a messy situation worse. Other countries sympathetic with Syria, like Iran and China, also expressed their concern about the West's rush to respond with force. UN inspectors were allowed in to assess the situation, with Russia leading a diplomatic effort to buy more time, while a probe established what happened, what gas was used, and who might be responsible. Meanwhile, Britain, so quick to call for strong response, found its effort to punish Assad collapse after Parliament voted against a motion to use military force in Syria. The vote made the White House think twice, with Obama saying he would take the case to Congress before deciding on a military response. Then, a diplomatic breakthrough. A seemingly casual remark by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry that Assad could make amends if he gave up his chemical weapons. By the end of September, an agreement had been reached, under which Syria would declare its entire stockpile and have all weapons either destroyed or removed by the middle of 2014. Inspectors began arriving in October to ensure the regime would follow through. Still, peace in Syria seems a distant goal, as rebel factions and the government still struggle for survival. The summer of 2013 was also a momentous one for Egypt. Things had not been smooth sailing for the country's first democratically elected president, Mohamed Morsi, since taking office in 2012. Many in Egypt were alarmed at the direction the country was taking under Morsi after barely a year as president. Things reached a boiling point at the height of summer. Fed up with his administration and the influence of Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood, hundreds of thousands took to the streets towards the end of June, demanding Morsi step down. With Egypt at breaking point, the army decided to act. At the beginning of July, the army removed Morsi and his administration from power. Yet another interim government was installed. But that wasn't the end of Egypt's problems. Morsi supporters and Muslim Brotherhood launched waves of demonstrations, which once again threatened to plunge Egypt into turmoil. Authorities cracked down hard, dispersing pro-Morsi supporters with violence. Hundreds were killed in the summer of rage that swept through Egypt. Many of Morsi's supporters were either killed, forced underground, or imprisoned. By September, the situation had calmed somewhat, but things still remain tense. Morsi is due to stand trial for his alleged misdemeanors in office, another potential flashpoint for this strategically important country. Meanwhile, Egyptians are looking ahead to yet more elections. But many will be asking themselves, will this really change anything? The usual concerns over Iran's nuclear program lingered in 2013, but it was the end of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's term as president, which got people wondering whether relations between Tehran and the West would soften. Certainly, the election of Hassan Rouhani gave rise to cautious optimism. Seen as a moderate, compared with his predecessor, he made all the right noises, condemning the Holocaust while offering an olive branch to Europe and archenemy, the United States. The overture was taken up by President Barack Obama, who personally spoke to Rouhani on the phone. It was the first telephone conversation between leaders of the two countries in more than 30 years. Obama also instructed Secretary of State John Kerry to initiate fresh talks over Tehran's nuclear program. After weeks of negotiations, a major deal was announced at the end of November.
After intensive negotiations, we reached agreement today on a joint plan of action, which sets out an approach towards reaching a long-term, comprehensive solution.
Nuclear activity would be suspended for 6 months in exchange for some relief from crippling economic sanctions. Diplomats say it gives both sides time to work out a more comprehensive agreement. The goal is to prevent Iran from developing atomic weapons while still meeting the country's nuclear needs.
Coming up after the break, events in Africa, including an attack on a Kenyan shopping mall. Plus, saying goodbye to some major world figures, including the most famous of them all, Nelson Mandela.